Okay, so pretend your kids, or don't. Of course, it's the day for it, isn't it? I've been thinking about, obviously, Christmas for some time now because it's one of the two big days for us in Christianity. Well, all of you older ones are going to know who Jimmy Buffett was. Jimmy Buffett said, life is more manageable if thought of as a scavenger hunt than a surprise party. Now, we've all been to surprise parties that have fallen flat, or the person being honored doesn't really like surprise parties. They're not really all they're cracked up to be, right? And yet I think we think about life that way. That somewhere out there, something's going to jump on us and we're not going to be ready, even though it's for us. Or if you did think of it as a scavenger hunt, that God has given us all good things and they're scattered all around in our lives. Don't you think you'd look at things differently? Wouldn't you look at things differently? So may 2024 be for you a scavenger hunt, and you find all the good that God has given you. Fourth Sunday of Advent, the last Sunday before Christmas. Christmas, the day of Emmanuel, God with us. The celebration of the fact that God came so close, that God became intimate with humanity, that God became one of us. Perhaps St. John put it best in his first letter, speaking of this closeness, when he spoke of God by saying, that which we have heard, which we have seen with our own eyes, which we have looked at and our own hands have touched, this we proclaim. The life appeared, we have seen it, and testify to it. Christmas is a day that we celebrate that God is here with us, so near as our fingertips, as near as the things our eyes see, as near as the sounds hitting our ears. But this, the fourth Sunday of Advent, the last Sunday before Christmas, I think we need reminding of the God of mystery and the God of wonder, the God of when you least expect it, the God of where you least expect it, the God of how you least expect it. So I'm going to tell you this very simply, no dramatic presentation, no fanfare. I'll follow that ancient line woven through the Old Testament and into the gospel writings, that God's Messiah would be hidden, and that his followers, the ones who seek the Lord, must search out the hidden places in order to encounter the Messiah. Speaking of the Redeemer and the Holy One, Isaiah tells us, in the shadow of his hand he hid him. He made him into a polished arrow and concealed him in his quiver. Again, in Isaiah, this theme of hiddenness is repeated in the 53rd chapter. He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Now, what I'm about to say you've all heard before, but it's worth mentioning it again. Jesus came to this earth in a place, to a people, in a situation not acceptable for a prince, let alone the Son of God. Now, if you wanted to make an impact, if you wanted someone to know far and wide, to be easily recognized, why would you, in that day, send the Prince of Peace to the Eastern Mediterranean? The area was the Roman backwaters. Roman officials themselves considered being sent to this region a demotion at best, if not a punishment or maybe even a death sentence. And if you're going to send the Son of God to the Jewish people, why then to Galilee? Galilee at that time was called Galilee of the Nations. To the Orthodox Jews, the people in that place mingled far too much with Gentiles. And if the Son of God was going to be sent to the Jewish people, why not then Jerusalem? Even worse, God made Nazareth the Messiah's hometown. In the Gospel of John, quoting Nathanael from the Old Testament, it says, Nazareth, can anything good come from there? To add to the difficulties of recognizing greatness, God sent his son to Mary, who was only engaged, not married yet. Even Joseph's first thought was to end the engagement because he had not been with Mary that way. In a society, a culture that considered adultery an offense worthy of stoning death by stoning, Jesus began, from his very conception, with a social handicap. Certainly in a small town, many, if not all, knew of the situation and Joseph's hesitancy. Let's face it, if a teenage girl came to you and said she was expecting, but that it was God's child, well, we all know how the story would go. Which brings us to the actual birth. In that day, royal births were attended by public celebrations and sacrifices, with priests and the equivalent of doctors, on silk sheets with heralds on fast horses, spreading the good news throughout the kingdom. Jesus, however, was born far away from home, with livestock, placed in a manger, during the hustle and bustle of the Roman census, virtually unnoticed. Then Jesus lived the first 30 years of his life with only two events noted. First, his presentation at the temple for circumcision as a newborn, and again at the temple at age 12 for the beginning of his manhood. We hear nothing from age 12 to age for the next 18 years. And so the mystery deepens. After 3 years of a ministry full of miracles and healings, of loving and caring, Jesus died as a criminal, executed by the Romans, forsaken by the Jews, seemingly abandoned by God. Crucifixion in that day was considered a fate worse than death. In Roman society, the one crucified was not to be spoken of. It just was not done in polite circles. But in Jewish culture, the one who was crucified was never to be spoken of again. It was as if the crucified one never existed. No one would remember you. It was why Jesus on the cross gave his mother to John, because with Jesus' crucifixion, it was as if the family line never was. Mary would have become, in essence, a non-person, which would be a living death. We began this morning with Isaiah speaking of the Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. In the shadow of his hand, he hid him. He made him into a polished arrow and concealed him in his quiver. Tomorrow we celebrate Christmas, the birth of Emmanuel, God with us. But on this, the fourth Sunday of Advent, the last Sunday before that celebration, we need reminding that God's Messiah still comes to us in the mystery, in the hymnus. As followers, we are to look for the Messiah there. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." And all those around Jesus said, "When did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger or needing clothes, or sick or in prison?" God remains for us to find in the places we least expect him, for the reasons we least understand, because we all still insist on seeing greatness only in those who have wealth or fame or power or beauty. This Christmas, we need reminding of the need to look for God in all the hidden places of our lives. For some of us, it will be in our poverty. For others, in our loneliness. For still others, in our illness. For some, in their youthfulness and inexperience. Take a moment today to think of the places in your life where you would least expect to find the Messiah. He is calling for you from that place. And if you doubt me, close your eyes and conjure up the image of a baby, born in a stable, lying in a manger. Go in peace. Amen.